Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this beautiful Capitol building in Washington, D.C. A very timely topic that does not see much of a light in our capital, the Sahel, and is it 2024 a year of a wake-up call for this region? We truly have a distinguished panel with us today, and two of our speakers who are from Europe have flown over to DC to share their views about ever-growing humanitarian crisis in Sahel that is equally troubling, with militias, terrorist groups, weapon trafficking, people trafficking, 3 coups in Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali, but also the economic alliance that these countries disrupted, creating their own, following transfer of their military from France just over last Christmas. Many more elements to discuss. General Didier Castres, who was one of the key military leaders in France, will share his expertise, as he's really committed to the region and present in the region. So is Maria Nicoletta Gareda, who is from Rome, which I will read later the bios, but just to say, successfully negotiated really difficult tribal reconciliations back for this region, mainly Libya, but then works very closely with Sahel. Ambassador Charles Stray from FPRI, Salil Ali, professor from University of Delaware. But before we start this extremely beautiful, important conversation, it's a great honor to invite FPRI President, Ellen Flynn, who I want to thank for partnering with us in making this event a possibility, and she will address us with the opening remarks.
First of all, thank you, Sasha, for the warm introduction and for the opportunity to partner with all of you this morning, and for those of you in the audience here, we're thrilled to have you here. First of all, I'd like to say thank you to the Transatlantic Leadership Network and Sasha for making this possible. Without it, we couldn't. I'd also like to thank Senator Coons, who made it possible for us to have this lovely room here this morning. We would not have that without his aid and assistance and endorsement. I'd also like to thank the University of Delaware and Professor Salil Ali for being a great partner with us. And as Sasha pointed out, we have a very distinguished panel this morning with Ambassador Charles Ray, who also happens to be the chair of our Africa program at the Foreign Policy Research Institute, FPRI, and had a distinguished career in the Foreign Service as well as the Army, and served in the continent a couple of times, including ambassador to Zimbabwe. General Didier Castres, we're thrilled to have here, and thank him for coming, as well as Maria Gaida for coming all the way from Rome to be here with us, so we are especially grateful. As you know, the Sahel over the last year, well, not just over the last year, but particularly in the last year or so, has had a very turbulent time of it, and I think there are implications that go well beyond Africa. I think we all understand that, to the rest of the world, particularly Europe, but of course the United States as well, so we care deeply about Africa. And so I'm thrilled that we can have this panel here today and all of you with us. So I won't take too much longer, except to say, if you're not familiar with the Foreign Policy Research Institute, FPRI, we've left some brochures on the seat, and you can look about them. We are a non-partisan, I'll say that again, non-partisan tank. We're based in Philadelphia, but we consider ourselves a national asset, a global asset, and we have partners and fellows all over the globe. And we do our best to be unbiased as an institution. Our fellows represent all points of view, but we as an institution do not take any kind of political positions on. And of course, we're pro-US now. But, so please check us out online. The content is free. I will say it's free to you, it's not free to us. So if you're so inclined to become a member or a donor, we of course welcome that. So without further ado, I will turn this over to our distinguished panel. Thank you.
Thank you, President. Thank you very much. So I'm not going to introduce now the entire panel, but I will do so individually for each first panel. So it was supposed to be ladies first, but the panel has discussion internally on structure of this panel. So we will start with Ambassador Charles Ray, and then Salim, and then the General and Maria. Ladies first will then be ladies last, because that's how you will have a much more clearer picture for the Q&A session. So, Ambassador, I want to introduce you. So I'll leave you back. Ambassador Charles Ray, a member of the Board of Trustees and Chair of the Africa Program at the Foreign Policy Research Institute, served as a U.S. Ambassador to the Kingdom of Cambodia, Republic of Zimbabwe. In addition, he was the first U.S. Consul General to Ho Chi Minh City, Vietnam, opening the Consulate General there in 1998. During his diplomatic career, Ambassador Ray served as Deputy Chief of Mission in Freetown, Sierra Leone, and at consulate posts in Guangzhou, Shenzhen, China, Chiang Mai, Thailand. He was diplomat in residence at the University of Houston during 2005-2006 academic year, responsible for outreach and recruiting at colleges and universities in South Texas. Prior to joining the Foreign Service in 1982, he served 20 years in the U.S. Army with postings in Europe and Asia, including 2 tours in Vietnam during the war. Ambassador Ray is currently a member of the board of the directors of the American Academy of Diplomacy, Communications Director for the Association of Latin American Ambassadors, a member of the American College of National Security Leaders, a member of the Washington Institute of Foreign Affairs, and a member of the board of directors of the Cold War Museum. Ambassador?
Thank you. I think I'm first so that everyone else will look better no matter how what we do, but that's okay. The Sahel region of Africa is facing a series of crises, including armed conflict, violent extremism, poverty, negative impacts of climate change, food insecurity, political instability, military coups. The list of woes of this region could go on and on. There are nearly 3 million people in the region have been forced to flee their homes because of violence or climate change impacts, and some 13 million are in dire need of humanitarian assistance. Countries like Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso are facing now one of the fastest growing displacement crises in the world. The region, which stretches from the Atlantic Ocean to the Red Sea, depending upon your degree of cynicism, can be viewed as a belt across the waist of the African continent or a choke collar around its neck. The transition zone between the vast expanse of the Sahara to the north and the more humid savanna regions to the south, it has the fastest growing rate of population and the lowest levels of economic development in Africa, and in the world for that matter. There have been a rash of military coups and other extra-constitutional government takeovers in the past few years. Between 2020 and 2023, there were military coups in Guinea, Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Gabon, and constitutional coups in Tunisia, Chad, and Sudan. In addition, there were attempted coups in Gambia, Sierra Leone, Central African Republic, and Sao Tome and Principe. The coup in Niger, a nation that had experienced nearly a decade of relatively stable government, and which served as a center of U.S. and French counterterrorism operations in Africa, was especially problematic in that it showed the ineffectiveness of purely defense-oriented counterterrorism operations that are not accompanied by serious efforts to address the underlying causes of extremism or to encourage and support the economic aspirations of the people. The increased instability in the Sahel has created a vacuum that actors whose interests are inimical to U.S. national security interests have rushed to fill. Russia's Wagner Group, for example, which has long had a strong presence in the Central African Republic and Libya, has moved into Mali, Niger, and Sudan. But it's not just Russia that is showing an interest in the region. China, India, Turkey, and Iran have all shown an interest in this troubled region. Despite decades of U.S. and French involvement in the Sahel and the expenditure of billions in security assistance, it's still one of the poorest, least politically developed, stable regions in the world. Its growth rate, the youth demographic and abundance of natural resources, some of the significant strategic interests to the global economy, make it a region of interest to the rest of the world and an area for competition between and among other world powers. The challenge, however, will be how to reconcile the geopolitical interests of multiple foreign powers with the aspirations of the region's people for economic development and security. I believe a starting point would be to accept that what we've done in the past has not worked. Despite the billions of dollars spent by the UN, by the US and France, there's been no real stability in the region and precious little in the way of true security. We've only succeeded in improving the efficiency of military and security services, who in turn have taken over ineffective governments, done a poor job themselves of governing the countries. And this is something our security training has not designed, it wasn't designed to teach them to do. Militaries are not organized, trained, or equipped to run countries. And often, these military regimes have been overthrown by other military regimes because of their ineffectiveness. And in most cases, this has been done by young officers that we've trained here in the U.S. And while security is essential, if security operations are not accompanied by economic, political, and social progress, it's a totally wasted effort. We must clearly define our strategic interest in the region and in each country, in cooperation with the people of these countries to determine what their needs and aspirations are, and then craft policies and programs that are designed to satisfy those needs and meet those aspirations. This won't be a short-term effort that will yield immediate results. We have to be prepared to be in it for the long haul and accept that in many cases progress will be incremental and will move at a glacial pace. Sub-Saharan Africa and the Sahel will have a major impact on the global order in the coming decades. Whether that impact is positive or negative will depend on what we do in partnership with the people of the region now. You could think of it in this way. If we continue to focus on the short term and plant weeds, the field will continue to be overrun with weeds. If we want to have the shade of prosperity and good governance, however, we have to be prepared to plant trees and allow our children to see them grow to maturity. The situation in the Sahel is a wake-up call for the people of the region, for they must assume the principal responsibility. But I think it's also a wake-up call for the rest of the world. By 2050, 25% of the world's population will be in sub-Saharan Africa, and a large percentage of those people will be in the Sahel. They can either be a positive force in the global community, or they can be our worst nightmare. The decision as to what to do and which future we will see is in our hands. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. We will certainly discuss this influence, Russian influence, Wagner Group, what a downgraded set of security arrangements after French left to come really to groups that are designated as a terrorist organization is a troubling reality. Professor Salil Ali, I need to read your bio now. Salim is a chair of the Department of Geography and Spatial Sciences at the Blue and Gold Distinguished Professor of Energy and the Environment at the University of Delaware. He was appointed by UN Secretary General as a member of the Advisory Board of Eminent Persons on Zero Waste. Professor Ali previously served as Chair in Sustainable Resource Development and Professor of Sustainability Science and Policy at University of Queensland in Australia. He was also founding director of the Institute for Environmental Diplomacy and Security at the University of Vermont. He was previously held appointments at the Brookings Institution, the Watson Institute for International Studies, and the UN Mandate University for Peace in Costa Rica. Professor Ali's primary research interests have been in the causes and consequences of environmental conflicts in the mineral sector and the process of using ecological factors to promote peace. Before embarking on an academic career, Professor Ali worked as an environmental health and safety professional at General Electric Corporation. His laurels include being a National Geographic explorer with field experience in more than 160 countries, being selected as a young global leader by the World Economic Forum, and serving on the boards of notable non-profit charitable organizations, including Resolve, Adventure Scientists and Mediators Beyond Borders International. Professor Ali?
Thank you so much, Sasha, for the generous introduction. We are assembled here today on a sobering topic. There are conflicts going on all over the world. Of course, unfortunately, the conflicts in the Middle East and Ukraine and Russia are forefront in the media. But there is another very serious conflict which has been neglected by a lot of, not just the media, I would say, but also in the halls of political power, and that is the conflict in the Sahel. So our goal with this effort is to raise the voice about the importance of this conflict for US foreign policy, particularly. And so we see this not just as some starry-eyed effort, we see this really as something pragmatic, something essential for US national security, and that is why Senator Coons' office, Senator Coons has been a champion for giving attention to Africa.
You need to speak on
So Senator Coons has been a champion for Africa in much of his work. And serves on the main Senate committee also, which deals with Africa, and so we are hopeful that the support from his office will also raise the prominence of this conflict in the halls of power in this building itself. So let me start off by reading a press release that just came out on 25th of January. From Niamey, Niger. Niger authorities ordered the suspension of all mining licenses in the nation after 1,400 kilograms of gold bars coming from this country was seized in Ethiopia. It was reported by local media that the confiscated gold has no official backing to legalize the means by which it was obtained and its owners. It was reported that some 100 people from different official institutions attached to Niamey Airport, from where the metal was shipped, were dismissed from their functions as a preventative measure. So, this has just happened within the last week. Okay, we have the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime issuing a report just in December of 2023 that has noted, and this is the part of the area that has been neglected, I would say, that the Sahel region provides 228 tons of gold per annum on average. This is within the last 3 years on average, worth at least annually of 12.5 billion US dollars to the gold market. So what does this have to do with US national security? Well, if you read most of the documents with reference to concerns about financing terrorism, you will find that they lead back to concerns about illicit supplies of minerals. And my own research area has been on the linkage between the extractive industries and governance in various ways. They can be a source of good governance, but they can often be a source of very poor governance, and they can also spread like a contagion in terms of their impact in other parts of the world. And when you have a lack of governance or you have malevolent governance, this can be very pernicious. So what I would argue is that we need to think about this at multiple levels. This is a challenge, not just a military challenge, it is an economic challenge for the people who are making their livelihoods from artisanal gold mining. You don't want to deprive them of that either. You also have to think about the demand centers on where these minerals go, how are they used, how they're processed. And the US government has, to its credit, paid some attention to that. The US National Science Foundation, I should note, has actually funded several programs, and the State Department to do research on analyzing the networks of trade around illicit minerals. And our university actually has been a recipient of one of those grants, which has focused on using techniques from machine learning and other ways to track trade data and find out where there are some anomalies to understand where these illicit supplies of minerals may be going. But we are seeing this still very much at the level of low politics. You know, it's a lot of the technocrats, the people in US Department of Labor, a few people maybe somewhere in Foggy Bottom in the bowels of the building who are working on it, but you do not have that attention where it has been raised to high politics. And so I would say that we need to think about this now as a multi-pronged effort. As we have heard from Ambassador Ray in terms of the panoramic scope of the security challenge, but it will require us to have both at the micro level the attention to detail, as well as at the macro level raising the profile of the Sahel and its challenge for human development, human security, mineral security, and the broader trajectory that we see ourselves for peace building. And so with that, I will just conclude by saying that my own, I'm originally from Pakistan, I should say. And for me, this is not just an academic matter. It's a personal matter because I have seen that if we neglect conflicts for a long time, they can come back to haunt us. As you know, Pakistan is neighbored by Afghanistan, and we all know what happened in Afghanistan when that conflict came back to haunt the United States. And I would say that this is a real warning time. We cannot ignore the Sahel for not just the reasons I have given you, but the other reasons you will hear. And I would urge you all to take this message to whatever constituencies you can have influence on and raise the profile of this matter, not just as an academic issue, but something that deserves attention now. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Ali. Emotional at the end and right, so I think we should maybe contemplate what the remedies would you suggest everyone at the panel, how to elevate that, what you call from a technocrat level, which technocrats are great people and important people in our system. And I love those who actually really do the work, and there's a plethora of such a great folks in our town capital. But you're right, I think the point well taken, and it will be certainly part of my questions. And now, with great honor to welcome our General from France, General Wakeup. He's a French 4-star general, a graduate of the Sahel Military Academy. He spent the majority of his operational career in the equivalent of the Marine Corps. He served on the staff of the President of the Republic from 2005 to 2009, working with President Chirac and President Sarkozy. Subsequently, he commanded the Joint Headquarters responsible for plans and ongoing operations at the Joint Chiefs of Staff from 2009 to 2011. Following this role, General served as the Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations from 2011 to 2016. During his tenure at the État-Major des Armées, General Castret actively participated in numerous operations, either led by France or with France collaborating within EU, NATO, or UN coalitions. These operations spanned across various regions, including Afghanistan, the Ivory Coast, Libya, Mali, the Central African Republic, Iraq, and Syria. Notably, he contributed to the planning and command of the Cercle and Barkhane operations. In 2016, General Castret was appointed Inspector General of the Army, and he retired from the French Army in 2018, when he established a consulting firm specializing in defense matters, particularly focusing on African issues. Since 2023, he has held the position of the President of the Gaulle Company. General, welcome, and what is yours?
Thank you, Sasha. I'm going to give you a French point of view regarding the situation in the Sahel Strait. A French point of view, but a point of view in French, because my English is not good enough to speak in English. Then I speak with my neighbor, who is going to translate my propos. Concernant le Sahel, et je partage beaucoup des choses qui ont été évoquées par l'ambassadeur Ryan, je crois qu'on est face à un changement et à un bouleversement majeur sur plusieurs points. Le premier, c'est que 8 coups d'État ont eu lieu dans cette zone sahélienne élargie jusqu'au Soudan depuis 2021. La deuxième, c'est qu'on assiste à une dérive des continents où un certain nombre de pays sont en train de s'extraire de la communauté internationale. Renvoi d'ambassadeurs, fin des relations diplomatiques et refus de rester en contact avec les organisations internationales. Le troisième bouleversement, c'est la démographie. La démographie, c'est 89 millions d'habitants actuellement en zone sahélienne. Ça sera 196 millions en 2050. 196 millions en 2050. Il y a évidemment le point sécuritaire, mais il a été largement évoqué. Je crois qu'il y a un dernier phénomène qu'il faut prendre en compte, c'est le phénomène climatique. En un siècle, le Sahel aura progressé de 2 fois la superficie de la Californie. C'est ça les bouleversements qui sont en cours, et comme vous le savez, tous ces phénomènes interagissent les uns avec les autres et accentuent les tendances des uns et des autres.
So I share many of the various items that were broached, especially by Ambassador Ryan, and we are facing major upheavals in the Sahel region, especially in various domains, and mainly first the political domain. There were 8 coups that occurred in the last 3 years, and it has extended to Sudan since 2021. We have many diplomatic issues with diplomats who have been expelled. We have relationships that have been terminated with the ECOWAS, for example. We have international organizations that have been ostracized. We have demographic issues. There are 89 million inhabitants today in this area, and it is expected to grow to 196 million by 2050. We have security-related issues that were already broached. We also have climatic issues. In 100 years, the Sahara surface has doubled that of California. And all these domains interact with each other, and they are all increasing their trends.
Sans excès ni de paranoïa ni de pessimisme, si l'on ne fait rien au Sahel, quel est le scénario le plus probable? Le scénario le plus probable, C'est une zone grise de 3 millions de kilomètres carrés, c'est-à-dire l'équivalent de la surface de la Turquie, qui sera abandonnée à un chaos violent institutionnalisé. Et ce chaos violent institutionnalisé, il sera dans la main des chefs de guerre, des groupes armés, des États, des djihadistes et des trafiquants en tout genre. On a parlé des trafiquants de drogue, on a parlé des trafiquants d'or. Tous les trafics ont lieu au Sahel. Et toute cette zone, les gens trouveront un accord pour se partager les routes, les ressources, dans un conflit de basse intensité.
Without being excessively paranoid, we are really facing a very serious situation. And in the absence of vigorous and coordinated action, an area of 3 million square kilometers will be abandoned to a violent and institutionalized chaos in which warlords, armed groups, states, jihadists, and traffickers of all kinds, we talked about drugs, we talked about gold, will share or fight over spaces, routes, and tolls in a low-intensity conflict in Sahel. All of this in Sahel.
D'un point de vue militaire et d'un point de vue français, il y a 4 raisons pour lesquelles on ne peut pas rester sans rien faire. La première de ces raisons, c'est qu'on doit veiller à ce qu'un nouveau califat qui n'en porterait pas le nom s'installe en zone sahélienne et prépare des attentats qui viseront évidemment l'Occident. La deuxième raison, c'est que nous devons conserver une capacité de compréhension, une capacité de renseignement pour savoir ce qui se passe dans cette zone. On ne peut pas laisser se développer les trafics, tous les trafics de toute nature dans cette zone-là.
From a military and French perspective, we have 4 good reasons not to let the situation worsen, and we have to do something. The first one is that we have to make sure that a new caliphate in the Sahel region does not enjoy the same freedom of action and be able to launch attacks, planned attacks against the West. The second reason is that we have to maintain an ability to understand, collect intelligence, anticipate all kinds of trafficking that will intensify in the Sahel area due to a weakness of neighboring states and intrusion of foreign powers.
Il y a 2 autres raisons qui méritent qu'on s'attaque à la crise du Sahel. Il ne faut pas laisser la porte grande ouverte à nos compétiteurs stratégiques. On voit la progression notamment de la Russie. La Russie est en train de prendre quasiment tout le contrôle de ce quart nord-ouest de l'Afrique. Libye, Centrafrique. On a vu des annonces sur le Burkina Faso, sur le Niger, le Mali, et on sait que le Tchad est sa prochaine cible. Le jour où la Russie contrôle l'intégralité de cette zone, elle est finalement au pied de la citadelle Europe. Et son arme, ce ne sera pas les missiles, son arme, ce sera les flux migratoires. Et donc, pour ça, on ne peut pas laisser nos compétiteurs avoir le champ libre dans cette zone-là. Et puis la dernière, elle est d'un point de vue plus général. Je crois que ça dépasse largement les questions de sécurité, les questions économiques, les questions climatiques. C'est qu'en ce moment, l'Afrique est en train de devenir le levier pour contester le modèle occidental. En fait, tous les pays, tous les autocrates, tous les pays autoritaires sont en train de se servir de l'Afrique pour imposer leur modèle. Et ce modèle, ce n'est pas le nôtre. On assiste à un véritable scramble for Africa. La Russie, l'Iran, la Turquie, la Chine évidemment, mais aussi l'Arabie Saoudite, les EAU, le Qatar, tous sont en train de mettre le pied dans les États, le plus souvent les États les plus faibles.
We have 2 other reasons to tackle this issue in Sahel. We have to refuse to leave the door wide open to our main strategic competitors, and who are trying to get into this northwestern quarter of the area. And I'm talking about Libya, Central Africa, Burkina Faso, Niger, Mali, and Chad, which is becoming probably the next target of Russia. And the main weapon that could be used by Russia is the flow of migration flow. And the fourth reason, the last reason is actually that from a general perspective, the challenge reaches far beyond security, economic development, and migration flow issues. Africa is becoming the lever that is used by authoritarian regimes to impose the model, which is not ours. And we're witnessing a new scramble for Africa with Russia, China, Iran, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, the United Emirates, all vying for the favor of African states. Often the most failed of them, even if they're not even oppressing them.
Une fois qu'on a fait ce constat, on peut aussi constater que les solutions que nous avons apportées, les solutions que nous, Français, avons essayé d'apporter, et que globalement tous les pays occidentaux ont essayé d'apporter aux crises, ont échoué. Elles ont échoué pour ce que j'appelle les péchés capitaux de la gestion de crise. Il y a 5 raisons qui font que nous échouons dans notre façon de résoudre les crises. La première, c'est le syndrome du prêt-à-porter. C'est que sur chaque crise, nous appliquons un modèle inspiré de crises précédentes qui n'ont d'ailleurs pas été résolues par ça et qui sont la transposition d'un modèle occidental. Nous appliquons des modèles occidentaux à des crises qui ne le sont pas. Et en conséquence, ça ne marche pas. Il faut sortir du prêt-à-porter pour aller vers le sur-mesure. Il faut apprendre les crises dans leur réalité sociale, culturelle et historique. En règle générale, c'est pas ce que nous faisons.
So after making this acknowledgement of the situation, we must say that the solutions that the French, but also more broadly the West, have provided have failed. And I'm blaming this on 5 main causes that I call the capital sins, the 5 capital sins of crisis management. So there are 5 reasons why we failed to be successful in crisis resolution. The first of these capital sins is what I call the off-the-shelf syndrome, which means that we're trying to impose ready-made solutions to crisis. And that doesn't work. We try to transpose Western models and patterns, but it doesn't work either. So we have to aim for banning these ready-made solutions and go for tailor-made solutions. And this requires to take a brand new approach.
Le deuxième de ces péchés capitaux, c'est l'espèce de fascination militaro-sécuritaire que nous avons face aux crises. En fait, nous ne regardons les crises et leur résolution qu'à travers un microscope militaire. Or, nous avons vu que la force ne résout jamais les crises. La force militaire, elle permet de limiter l'acmé d'une crise, elle permet de séparer les belligérants, mais elle ne résout pas les crises. La violence sur un théâtre d'opération, ce n'est jamais la cause de la crise, c'est la conséquence de la crise. Et donc, il faut chercher au début quelles sont les causes et s'attacher aux causes et pas aux conséquences. Les Battle Damage Assessment ne sont jamais une réponse aux crises, jamais. J'ai connu ça, j'ai vu ça en Afghanistan, où on annonce chaque semaine combien on a tué de personnes, mais on n'a résolu aucune crise comme ça. Je ne dis pas qu'il faut éviter la force, je dis qu'il faut s'attacher aux causes des crises et pas aux conséquences des crises.
Our second mistake is our fascination for the military security way of acting that actually leads us to observe a crisis and measure its evolution only through the lens of military action. However, we know that military action alone is never the solution. Military action can limit a crisis, can allow us to separate belligerents. But outbursts of violence are never the cause of crisis, but their consequences. Battle damage assessments have never been the answer to a crisis. We have never solved a crisis like this. I'm not saying we have to avoid using force, of course, but we must focus on the causes, not just on the consequences.
Le troisième péché capital est celui de ne pas connaître dans la grammaire des crises une règle pourtant première, c'est la règle de l'inconcordance des temps. Il faut comprendre et intégrer que le temps politique est différent du temps médiatique, est différent du temps diplomatique, est différent du temps du développement et encore différent de la reconstruction d'un pays. Et de l'autre côté, il faut être conscient que plus le temps passe, plus une force étrangère dans un pays devient partie du problème. Qu'est-ce qu'on en tire comme conséquence? Que lorsqu'un pays décide de s'engager dans la gestion d'une crise, il faut qu'il soit assuré qu'il a les forces morales, politiques, diplomatiques, économiques, financières et le soutien de l'opinion publique pour s'attacher à la résolution d'une crise.
The third sin is actually failing to acknowledge a basic rule, and that is that of the discrepancy in timing. We must understand that the timing of military action is different from the timing in the field of media, diplomacy, development, and reconstruction. And conversely, we need to understand that passing time can actually act against us. A foreign party in a country becomes actually part of the problem at some point of time. So when we engage in the resolution of a crisis, we need to be sure that we have the moral, political, and financial strength to see this strategy through to the end. And we also need to have the support of the public opinion.
Le quatrième péché capital, c'est de considérer les crises que l'on voit émerger, et notamment les crises au Sahel, comme des crises qui sont cloisonnées par nature. Le banditisme, la drogue, le terrorisme, ou cloisonnées par la géographie. Or, la géographie ne cloisonne pas. Les frontières ne veulent rien dire pour les gens qui y vivent. Et donc, comme on est face non pas à des crises séparées, mais à un système de crises, on doit lui apporter une réponse système qui soit extrêmement globale. Ce que nous ne faisons pas. Nous voulons régler le problème du Mali, le problème du Niger, le problème du Tchad. Mais tous sont liés. Tous sont liés. Et donc, il faut qu'on ait une vision globale qui embrasse l'ensemble de la problématique.
The fourth critical mistake lies in viewing the various crises that are taking place in the world, especially those concerning Sahel, as events that are dissociated and geographically compartmentalized, like we want to deal like with terrorism and then with separate issues, but that are compartmentalized by national borders. But actually, terrorism and other kinds of trafficking and criminal activities, they coexist in a kind of common synergy. And instead of treating these phenomena as a sum of separate crises, we must recognize them as components of a larger crisis system. And we didn't do that. We tried to solve the Niger problem by itself, and the problem in Mali by itself, and the problem in Chad by itself. So our response should not be fragmented, but rather comprehensive, and it should address all the challenges in an interconnected way.
Le dernier de ces péchés capitaux, c'est que nous avons la plupart du temps tendance à agir sous le coup de l'émotion, sous la pression des médias et de l'opinion publique et dans la précipitation. En fait, le plus souvent, nous apportons une réponse médiatique plutôt qu'une solution stratégique. Et ça ne produit pas d'effet. En fait, dans notre façon d'aborder les crises, nous donnons le sentiment que dire voudrait faire. Or non, il y a un décalage entre dire et faire. Et c'est le cinquième de ces péchés capitaux.
And the fifth and last capital sin actually involves the fact that we respond to situation in the heat of the moment and under the pressure of the media and public opinions, and often hastily. And this tendency favors delivering a response that is tailored for immediate use instead of achieving a true strategic response. And it's as if we were giving the priority to saying overdoing.
Un dernier mot, je ne suis pas venu donner une leçon. En fait, devant vous, je suis presque venu confesser ce que j'ai appris dans toutes les crises que j'ai gérées. Le constat général, c'est que nous devons changer d'approche, nous devons changer de logiciel. Nos méthodes ne fonctionnent pas dans le monde d'aujourd'hui.
So I haven't come today to teach you a lesson, of course, and rather I came to admit and confess about what I learned in the various areas where I was engaged. We need to change our approach, we need to change our software, and up to now, our methods have not worked.
Thank you very much in English.
Thank you, General. I mean, we argue about this. You could easily speak in English, but okay, you know, it's beautiful to hear French in a capital with voila, okay. You've touched really on several issues and already brought certain new proposals on what would mean to tackle Sahel in a tailor-made approach. But that will be the key in our conversation. After now, we hear our ladies first. Maria has designated and implemented more than 150 projects involving victims of conflict, survivors of war, rape, sexual violence, war infractions, grassroots organizations, and leading personalities from the realm of politics, religion, business, culture, and the arts. Since 2011, for Arapakis, she has created programs and designated mediation platforms to address issues of acknowledgement, healing, justice, security, development, health, education, and reconciliations in Libya, Mali, Chad, Niger, Sudan, and Syria. And that with the support of the Italian government, the European Union, and private donors. Since October 2015, with Arapakis, Gaida was advocated nationally and internationally for an integrated approach with regards to conflict and instability, reconciliation, security, and development in the Libyan South and in the Sahara-Sahel region. Among agreements facilitated by Maria Gaida are the 2017 and 2018 Fezan, Peru, and Awad Suleiman reconciliation agreements, the 2019 and 2022 Peru and the Haley of Mosul agreements, and 2020 Council of Fezan establishment agreement, the 2021 Fezan coexistence and social harmony agreement, and 2016 reconciliation agreement between tribal militias of Fezan, 2021 Rome Declaration that formalized the CSP, Cadre Stratégique Permanent, between the major armed movements of northern Mali, and the 2022 Rome Agreement of Principles between all armed movements of the North, CSP, PSD, and as well as a community of peace-building programs in the Darfur and Kordofan regions of Sudan. On April 21st, 2022, Maria Gaida established the Pax Humana Foundation, which aims to contribute to stability and peace through the economic angle. As president of Pax Humana Foundation, Gaida has promoted partnerships in the trade, business, academic, and cultural sectors in the Afro-Mediterranean area from Serbia to Rwanda. So many agreements, maybe like the Secretary General of the United Nations with a full mandate. Maria.
So I should use yours?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Thank you, Sasha. Thank you, NPRI. Thank you, Senator Coons and his staff. We are in the House of the People, and I am overwhelmed with joy to be able to bring to you the voice of the people of the communities of the Sahel that I have the privilege and the happiness of being able to work with. And most important, I have their trust. And so for me, this is a very important mission to bring to you their thoughts and aspirations. I could begin by describing the Sahel and its legendary kingdoms. It's a literal and mythical shore extending along the southern rim of the Sahara from the Atlantic to the Red Sea, with the desert above and the savannas below. I could speak of its fascinating civilizations and their intricate social structures, the wisdom of empires that acknowledge the gift of tolerance and the necessity for decentralization, embodying values such as fraternity, equality, freedom, justice, and human dignity. Principles which are enshrined in the Monday Constitution, proclaimed by Sundiata Keita, predating by centuries our Universal Declaration of Human Rights. I could share tales of the legendary Tuareg, the power of their matriarchy, the fearless Tebo, the noble Arabs and the fervent Pearl, the Bambara, the Hausa, the Swahili, the Konari, all the communities and cultures that compose that rich mosaic which is the Sahel. I could mention the unifying role of Islam, spreading across the desert like spiritual fire, joining all peoples under one God, yet holding on to their beliefs and traditions, which thrive under date trees, in caves, in the oasis, and along the shores of mighty rivers. I could touch upon the sins and the errors of colonialism, the predators and masters of greed, attempting to erase intricate social architectures and ways of life, drawing borders, dividing peoples, pitting one against the other, and favoring those aligned with their interests. And I could also speak of the deeply ingrained heritage of colonialism or neocolonialism, which continues to sow trouble even in countries that have reclaimed their sovereignty, national dignity, and territorial integrity. The latter is a legacy that does not prize the geographic human coherence of the people of the Sahara, as seen in the empires of old, which were multicultural, multi-ethnic. But it is based on borders and governance models inherited from the West that cut across communities with different cultural, linguistic, and traditional backgrounds, bitterly dividing black against white, nomad against farmer, farmer against herder, the desert against the savanna, and the capitals against the bush. But I would rather speak of the beauty and the hope in the Sahel, where individuals labeled as bad can evolve into good, and where legitimate aspirations for dignity, justice, and economic opportunity are the cornerstone and the key. The Sahel is not a hellhole of corruption, crime, rebellion, and terrorism gone astray. It is not an El Dorado of natural resources to be preyed upon and exploited by predators from near and far, nor can it be a trophy in the new geopolitical game between North and South. The Sahel is the geographic human space that connects our civilizations and our seas. It is the gateway between the Mediterranean and the great continent of Africa, deserving consideration, dialogue, and respect. The peoples of the Sahel cannot be neglected, and their leaders should not be shunned or ignored. Establishing peace and stability in the Sahel requires addressing the needs and aspirations of majorities as well as those of local communities, rebel movements, and tribes that extend beyond national borders and into the vast Sahara. Conflict and violence between and within communities seed revenge across generations, and the winners of today are destined to be the losers of tomorrow. But trust in Western values have been eroded by negligence, strategic errors, double standards, and propaganda. The people of the Sahel need to believe that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. A new, disruptive, dignity-centered approach is likely our only remaining option. Tactical agreements that do not address the truth and the root causes of conflict are not sustainable, and the Western political, social, and economic model is at stake. The idea that a strong man is the only guarantee against anarchy is misleading. Relying on autocrats to address complex societal issues does not yield desirable outcomes. Entrusting security solely to autocrats, disregarding the fundamental principles of our societies, is proving to be counterproductive. And power obtained by force will always be threatened by other forces, leading to further entrenchment and violence. A new approach would include a collective effort to coordinate top-down and bottom-up diplomacy, delivering strategic and coordinated humanitarian aid, vocational and academic training, cultural protection, and economic investment in full respect of local needs and aspirations. Because terrorism is fueled by poverty, injustice, hopelessness, and fear, the stabilization of local communities through a concrete and timely, coordinated, strategic, global plan for the delivery of social services, education, health, equal opportunity, administrative autonomy, and inclusion. These are the factors that will defeat terrorism, all forms of terrorism, and keep predators at bay. This is what will allow the Sahel to find its way towards prosperity, stability, and peace. Those who stand by their side on this journey will one day have the honor and benefit of being acknowledged as trusted partners, and perhaps, who knows, maybe one day even as friends. Thank you.
Well, you don't often hear such speeches in these schools here. Thank you very much. Indeed. Okay, well, so I think we should go straight to it, and I've asked questions from the currents, and but also with a reflection on how to solve it, so the problem and solution. Let's maybe from general, going this way to Maria. So we here, as you know, in the United States in particular, Russia is one of the main topics. So Russia here, Russia there, Russia investigation, Russia interference, Russia. Wagner Group, and we know that from Libya, this is the first event that I'm aware of in recent history that has drawn serious buzz in our Central Command and Army when they wrote to the Congress, say, hey people, we have 3 Russian military bases just in Libya. It's like our southern flank, and whoa. Yes, we know about the migrants, we know the misfortunate stories of migrants coming from that area and trying to desperately cross towards Italy, which is a problem of its own, a security problem of its own besides humanitarian problems. So how do you get, now that the French is gone, and we maybe reflect a little bit on your opinions of that role of such influence, positive, good, bad, and ugly, but how you come now to take Wagner Group, how you persuade the local leaders that these people should not and will not at the end have the best interest of these people there, which is inevitably clear in other regions, but how you move from this really new low point to a more coherent point. And I want to also ask a question for the future, because this year, and I guess it will be discussed at the G7, but the European Commission has allocated $150 billion of what they call global gateway funding for Sahel. Is there any plan? Is there any ideas? Is that also including the stronger security arrangements that could balance this in a positive way?
I'm just listening like probably into the French, right?
And I would suggest also, if the audience has questions, if you can write them just to make it more efficient and send them to us, because we certainly want to get to know what you have.
Je voudrais décrire très synthétiquement la façon dont la Russie, à travers Wagner, s'installe dans ces pays-là. Wagner s'est installé en Libye, mais également dans d'autres pays. En fait, pour reprendre une image un peu française, l'installation de Wagner, c'est comme la valse à 4 temps. La danse, la valse à 4 temps. Le premier temps, dans tous les pays où ils se sont installés, c'est une phase de séduction. Ils arrivent dans des États qui sont faillis, et ils promettent de la sécurité immédiate, la sécurité surtout des pouvoirs qui sont toujours fragiles, la phase de séduction. Le deuxième temps de cette valse, c'est la soumission. Ils prennent quasiment le contrôle de l'appareil d'État. Ça a été particulièrement net en Centrafrique, où Wagner rédigeait les lois centrafricaines sur l'exploitation minière, sur la levée de l'impôt, etc., etc. D'abord la séduction, ensuite la soumission. Le troisième temps, c'est l'exclusion de tous les autres partenaires. L'exclusion des partenaires bilatéraux, la France, les États-Unis, les Nations Unies, l'Europe, tout le monde est mis dehors et il reste en face à face avec les pays. Et puis le dernier temps de cette valse, c'est la prédation. C'est la prédation des ressources qui sont dans ces pays-là. L'erreur, ou en tout cas ce que nous devrions faire comprendre à ces gens-là, c'est que Wagner et la Russie n'ont aucun intérêt à résoudre la crise. Aucun intérêt. S'ils résolvent la crise, alors ils s'en vont. Donc, leur finalité, c'est d'entretenir cette crise. Ça, c'était pour que Wagner ait simplement un coup de projecteur sur Wagner.
So I would like to describe briefly how Russia is taking steps in this area through Wagner. And we talked about them being already in Libya. And to do this, I will use a French image, which is that of the 4-step waltz. You know the waltz, the dance? So there are 4 steps. The first step is, or the first phase would be the seduction phase, especially in failed states. So they come in there and they try to promise security. That is the first step. Second step is submission, the submission phase. They take control of the state, and that was typically the case in Central Africa. They even wrote the laws about mining, about taxes. The third step is the exclusion of partners. So first they exclude France, then the US, then the UN, then European countries, and they remain face-to-face with the local governmental state or population. And the fourth step is the predation of resources, so trying to steal the resources. So the people in these countries need to understand that Wagner is not interested in solving the crisis, because if they solve the crisis, then they will not be needed anymore, they will have to leave.
Sur les 150 milliards, les 150 milliards, c'est des promesses de dons, comme il y a des promesses de dons partout dans le monde pour plein de causes. Mais ils ne sont jamais dépensés. Le secrétariat général pour le Sahel était assis sur une montagne d'or qui n'ont pas été dépensés parce qu'on n'a pas su comment les dépenser ou parce qu'on n'a pas voulu les dépenser. Pour répondre plus directement à la question de Sacha, il y a 2 choses qu'on doit faire, qu'on devrait faire. La première chose, c'est qu'il faut faire émerger et reconnaître un leadership unique qui s'occupe de la gestion de la crise. On ne peut pas résoudre ces crises avec 25 acteurs qui font chacun quelque chose dans leur coin. Ça, c'est la première chose. La deuxième chose, c'est qu'il faut rapprocher la promesse de la réalité. Rapprocher la promesse de la réalité. Je pense qu'en ce moment, il y a probablement une opportunité à saisir pour le Sahel, c'est d'utiliser le G7. C'est de demander au G7, qui est le plus directement concerné par cette crise, de prendre le leadership pour apporter une solution au Sahel, à travers l'Italie qui actuellement dirige le G7.
Coming back on the 150 billion, these are actually promises to give them money, but actually this money is never spent. And we know that the Secretary General for Sahel has been sitting on a mountain of gold, but they didn't spend it, they didn't know how to spend it, so it was useless. To answer Sasha's question, first thing, we need to appoint and recognize a unique leadership. We can't do this with 25 actors. It has to be unique leadership. The second thing is we need to connect promises to reality. And there's an opportunity for Sahel, which is the G7. The G7 is the one that is most concerned with this issue, and we could take it could be a common leadership, especially through Italy, which is currently presiding the G7.
Un dernier mot sur cette nouvelle méthode. Je pense qu'il faut passer d'une logique d'offre à une logique de réponse à une demande. Dans ces crises, ce sont toujours les partenaires bilatéraux qui disent ce que l'on va faire. Je pense qu'il faut inverser ça. Il faut répondre à la demande des populations concernées.
Finally, about this new method, we need to make the offer match actually a demand, and we need.
Il faut la réponse à une demande plutôt qu'une offre aux gens qui sont
Yeah, we need to actually make the focus on meeting a demand than making an offer on a demand that we would not be aware of.
Thank you, General. Okay, Salim, are you going to jump in this, or you're
No, I think I would love to hear the other questions, and
Okay.
let's begin maybe.
Ambassador? Any comments on Russia?
Well, sorry. First, I'd like to say one of the things that we shouldn't do in terms of trying to counterbalance Wagner Group's presence is make it an us or them, very simple us or them proposition. Saying to a country, if you are dealing with the Russians through Wagner, then we won't deal with you, because that's just giving the game away, especially for some of the weaker autocratic regimes who are depending on Wagner to stay in power. And then I think I agree with what the general said, but I think we need to take a very realistic view. There are some countries in the Sahel where achieving parity with Wagner is not in the cards in the short term because they've got too tight a grip on the governments in power. There are others perhaps where we can approach the leadership not in a don't deal with Wagner, but in looking at what we can do with those governments to help improve the conditions of the people, and then getting the agreement to be able to go in and do it. Because at the end of the day, I think the way we prevail in a competition with groups like Wagner, with the Russians, is not so much fighting them, but of providing to these countries a better alternative, and showing them or allowing them to see that it's in their long-term interests to sort of cooperate and work with us, and recognize that this is not something that's going to happen in the next 6 months or 2 years or maybe even in the next 10 years. We could be looking at solving the problem in the Sahel for the next 20 years. And unless we are willing to commit that level of attention to it, then we might as well not start.
Ambassador, okay, Maria, if you return to this, but I think to move the conversation on, I will have a question about the rebels, about the people who run these countries, about the communities, the inclusive, so local ground. So that's an external influence of Russia, and then maybe if you want to refer something to it. But I think since you are traveling so much, you have so many personal connections. I mean, you really you know these people in person. It's not like people sitting and here with nice Chardonnay and so on, and we talk about Sahel. No, you are there, and that's, I think, makes a whole difference. So I think that's a really key question, general, broader question that I want to ask you. But then we have and I will say, for the general, when we go back down this road now, 2 questions from the audience. From the Embassy of Belgium representative. there is a growing anti-Western and anti-French sentiment in the Sahel, empowered by disinformation from bad actors. How should we deal with this? That's one question for the general. And the second is from the embassy, from representative embassy from Italy. Italy is committed to put Africa at the center of the G7 agenda this year. Based on your unique knowledge of the region, do you see a role for the G7 in the Sahel, and what kind of projects, initiatives should we leverage the G7 for? So that's for you, General, for later. So Maria, would, anything you want to say, but really about people that you know, and what would be this inclusive new approach that you would recommend Washington and Europe to embark, I guess, together?
First of all, I don't think that the world should be divided in bad guys and good guys, because good guys can become bad and bad guys can become good. And the truth is that I have the privilege of speaking to those who are considered bad guys by the West, and also to those who are considered bad guys by the people who are running the countries in the Sahel now. And I think that there's a lot of misinformation. I think that these communities, these rebel movements, these armed groups are not properly listened to. The propaganda, for example, says that the rebel groups of the north of Mali are fighting for independence. It's not true. They're not fighting for independence. They just wanted that what was foreseen in the Algiers Agreement, which was autonomy, administrative autonomy, could actually happen, because these are groups that don't share the same language, they don't share the same culture, they don't share the same history even in a way. So this is what they're asking for, autonomy, administrative autonomy, and not independence. None of the rebel groups with whom I am in contact with are looking for independence. They want to stay within their state. They want there to be more dignity and justice and economic opportunity in those states. Certainly, if the communities are suffering because of environmental pollution, because nobody is checking what these big foreign companies are doing in the Sahel, they're killing livelihoods with their pollution from the oil extraction or the gold extractions, and the communities have nothing to live on, and they're losing their traditional ways of life. The children don't even know the names of animals anymore in their language, because these animals don't exist anymore, because they've been wiped out by climate change or by environmental pollution. Well, then of course these problems, these issues, they're going to be used by people who have weapons. People who have weapons and think that the only way that you can fix the problems is, with force, with violence. And if you look around in the world right now, it seems to be the case. I mean, people who use violence get their voices heard. People tend to put things under the carpet. You put this crisis under the carpet, or these people, whether they're in the Middle East or whether they're in Eastern Europe or in the Sahel, you don't listen to them. It doesn't matter. You don't look at them. You just get to it when it's too late, when it's become a real problem. So I'm sorry, I don't mean to exaggerate, but just one more thing. The general was talking before about this money that everybody's sick. I always hear, the experts on the Sahel talking about all these big sums of money that are being used and given to the Sahel, but that's really funny, because I'm not talking about the capitals. The capitals of Bamako and Niamey and N'Djamena, they're beautiful capitals. They have, beautiful new infrastructure or whatever. I'm talking about the actual countries, outside the periphery, where you have, these countries are enormous. Niger is like, 4 times France? It's Niger, I'm sorry. They're enormous countries, and outside from the capitals, these people have absolutely nothing. And all of the big organizations that are funded to go and help create development or employment or whatever it is, they don't go to these places. They can't go to these places because of security reasons. So at the end, if there is money that is being spent, it's not being spent correctly, it's not being spent in the right places, and you always think that you need a lot of money. You don't. Because with $4,000, you can actually plant 1,000 dates in Tibesti, in Chad, where these date palm trees or whatever, they're being destroyed, they're being burned because I don't want to get into the politics of this, but there are plans to get rid of certain peoples. and certain peoples will not be gotten rid of. So and these are the peoples that are controlling the territories that are on the borders of all of these countries. So those are the people you should be talking to. Why are we talking to the people in the capitals and having this, tug of war with the Russians or the Iranians or whatever? Who is actually on the ground? Who is actually doing the trafficking or could stop the trafficking, whether it's human trafficking or drugs or whatever? The people, the tribes, the communities on the ground. And these communities, they don't look at these borders. They don't care about these borders. They're all over the place. So you need to talk to them. And if you talk to them today, for example, the new juntas or whatever you call them in these countries, they also need these people. So we would be helping the same people. By helping the people on these borders, you're also helping those countries. So at the same time, you're doing something that can build trust with those countries without having to go, in a tug of war with the competitors. Let's call them like that. Yeah, that's all I wanted to say. I'm sorry. Yes.
Thank you so much for so articulately presenting, Nicoletta. What I was going to also bring up is that this convergent approach to conflict resolution that you highlighted, that you need the bottom up, you need the tribes involved, and you will also need some kind of macro level approach. It also goes back to this issue of whether, how big a tent do we want? So is G7 the right tent, or is G20 the right tent? And that's an interesting question around the other point which you so wisely made, which is that we can't just say it's good guys and bad guys, because yesterday's bad guys can be tomorrow's good guys. And that's my minor concern with the G7 right now, is that the G7 has labeled China and Russia as the bad guys, and till kingdom come, they're the bad guys. And so that is a problem, because then you can't have engagement. And so I would say G7 is fine at one level to get consensus within the Western Alliance about what to do, but don't forget the G20 too. Because ultimately we need to solve the problem. At some point there will need to be some kind of engagement with the Russians, the Chinese and others. And we will need to figure out a way from a position of strength, as we always say, but there will need to be some opportunity to at least engage there as well. The same is true with the Saudis or the United Arab Emirates, where we have a more ambivalent relationship. The UAE is very conscious right now, and I was in Dubai for the Climate Change Convention, and also I have been serving on the Independent Governance Committee for the Dubai Multi-Commodity Center, because they've asked foreign academics to actually help improve this problem with the gold supply, because they see this as a huge reputational risk for the UAE. And just this week, UAE was taken off the grey list by the global financial system, because they are trying to make a change. They are trying to improve that, but they have a long way to go. Same is true of Turkey, same is true of many of these other countries. But that's where the G20 provides a bigger tent, because you do have Turkey there, you have the Saudis there, UAE is not part of it, but it is potentially a country which can be engaged with bilaterally too. So just some thoughts on that.
Thank you, Professor Ali. Okay, so General, would you have these two questions? If you can maybe combine it, we have to be a little more focused now. If there are any more questions, I would appreciate after General speaks to get those out. Others will have to start doing some conclusive remarks. General?
Sur le désamour, sur le fait que la France soit la cible de beaucoup d'opinions publiques au Sahel, je voudrais commander avec un vers latin de l'Énéide qui dit Infandum regina dolorem iubes renovare. En latin, ça veut dire ah, reine, tu réveilles une vieille blessure, c'est quand la reine Didon demande à Énée de lui raconter la guerre de Troie. C'est pour ça.
Thank you, General. So, commenting about the France being targeted by various public opinions in the Sahel region, I would like to quote a verse from the Aeneid. You know the Aeneid, and the translation from it would be, "Oh Queen, you are waking up an old wound in me." And this is about talking, which referred to the war of Troy.
Between
The Trojan War.
Trojan War between Queen Didon and Enea. Ene. I don't know how you pronounce that. Then, sur cette difficulté qu'a la France, mais pas que la France, qu'a l'Occident, je pense qu'il y a une chose qu'on doit mesurer, c'est que le Sud global, je ne sais pas s'il y a un terme équivalent, le Sud global, ce n'est pas une alliance pour promouvoir quelque chose, c'est une coalition contre l'Occident. C'est une coalition contre les lois de l'Occident, contre les valeurs de l'Occident. C'est ça la difficulté. C'est ça qu'on doit intégrer. Ensuite, on va le gérer, militairement, politiquement, diplomatiquement. Mais bien comprendre que le Sud global, c'est une alliance contre quelque chose et pas pour quelque chose.
So we're talking about this lack of well, France being targeted by political business, but it's not only France; it's also the West. And we need to understand that. So in French, we say le Sud global, which would mean it's not global; it's overall South. You say global South. Okay, the global South is not an alliance that has a goal. It's actually a coalition against the laws and the values of the West. And this is something we really need to understand, and then eventually we'll deal with it.
Maintenant, comment on fait? Maintenant, je pense qu'on a pris conscience trop tardivement qu'il y a de nouveau une sensibilité de ces pays-là à leur indépendance et à leur autonomie. Et que des présences de forces étrangères ou des présences importantes économiques ne sont plus supportables pour ces pays-là. Il faut donc d'abord abaisser la visibilité des présences, et notamment des présences militaires. C'est les décisions qui ont été prises récemment par le président de la République française. Je pense qu'il faut être dans une logique transactionnelle avec ces pays de façon plus transparente. Transactionnelle et transparente.
So now how can we deal with this? We are aware that this is being done a bit too late, and there is a lot of very high sensitivity in these countries about their independence, their autonomy, and they just don't want to see a foreign presence anymore. So we need to decrease our visibility, especially the military visibility and presence, and that was mentioned by the French president recently. We need to be in a transactional approach and a transparent approach.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. I guess that's answered your questions. You had one question?
Yeah, just to kind of bring it all back. A lot of you have touched on, I guess, how our methods haven't worked in that region. And in particular, we discussed how it's been alluded to a lack of trust, particularly with the West, but more frankly, the US and France for that matter. But all of you mentioned how we need to reestablish connections. I guess, could you come up with maybe one concrete idea on how the US and France also could reestablish trust in this area to start the process that you alluded to, reconnecting and showing an alternative?
Great, yeah. I'm wondering if we can take just some other questions people have and then collectively answer them. Just anyone else have questions, or the people who didn't have a pen and paper?
Yes.
All good? Okay. All
Yeah,
right.
I think we're in good shape. Okay, so fantastic question. I think Maria, any comments I would be
Well,
asking
I
similar.
mean, I like what Nicoletta said about this issue we have of labeling, good guys and bad guys. And as a start, I think one of the things that we all could do in the West, I hate to use that term because West of what, but we could stop with the labeling, because the minute you label good guys and bad guys, you stake out positions and you literally force people to start taking sides. One of the issues, for example, we use the Global South, and I think we pretty much agree that a lot of these actions are challenges to the quote Western-led world order that a lot of these countries feel has not served their interests at all. Not just not served well, but not served at all. And because of this good guy, bad guy labeling, we then assume that because the Chinese and the Russians are also challenging the Western-led world order, and these countries of the global South are joining them, that means that they are trying to establish a Chinese or Russian-led global order. And in the case of many of these countries, that couldn't be farther from the truth. They don't, recently we had a meeting and talking about South Africa doesn't want to be part of a Chinese-led world order any more than they want to be part of a U.S.-led world order. They want to see a world order that takes their aspirations and their desires into account. And so I think one of the main things that we could do is to start looking at ways that we can engage these countries to listen to their aspirations and discover what we can do to help them achieve them without this worrying about, are you dealing with the Russians, are you talking to the Chinese? I mean, you know, we talk to the, well, we don't talk to the Russians so much these days, but we talk to the Chinese, and I have friends in some of these smaller countries in Africa who, you know, their question is, well, why can't we? You do it. And I think when we just recognize that basic truth, that a sovereign country, no matter how small, no matter how weak, is still a sovereign country that has the right to decide who it engages with. And if we accept that, then that's a step in the direction of maybe clearing some of the smoke from the room. And we need to, and the other, and I'll stop ranting, is we need to stop with this turning competition into conflict. I mean, we're in competition with a lot of people, and we look at this current situation with China, and we're the two largest economies, and it's a question as to whether we're the two largest militaries, but, you know, we're in competition. That's inevitable. But because of the label good guy, bad guy, the competition with China is painted as more of a conflict than a competition. We're in competition with the UK. We've been in competition with the UK since 1776. Sometimes negatively, but sometimes not. I mean, we have a special relationship since the War of 1812 ended. And that, I think, is where we really need to focus on. Stop the labeling and look at the reality. Competition is inevitable. You get two, you have a barbershop on two ends of a street, they're in competition with each other, but they don't try to burn each other's shops down. And if we look at it as competition, not conflict, and we look at it as people have the right to make their own decisions and to decide their own course, and we can either go along with them or not, but we don't have to put a pejorative label on it because we disagree, then we've taken, I think, the first step to solving some of these issues. And the other is we need to have security, yes, but security, in my view, needs to be defined more in terms of more than just military security. It needs to be economic, social security. Without it, if you're focusing only on the physical military type security, as it's been said, you kill all the extremists in Mali, the ones who survive go and recruit in Niger. And so you're playing, I use the term, you're playing whack-a-mole instead of helping these countries to establish a positive presence in their border areas and of establishing a at least productive relationship with all of their people, as opposed to go into an area, have a firefight, burn a few houses, and go back to the capital. That's not the way to establish a secure environment in a country.
Thank you. Thank you. But I mean, I'm sure you're aware this is your extremely inspiring also concluding remarks, because you're really almost actually quite overboard. So everybody, no, that was fantastic. And so let's just get to the last points. Whoever, or three of you would like to say, Maria, I think we'll start with you, and then Salim, and General, you will conclude your final word of the whole panel. So,
Okay, well, I just want to say the bad guys, the good guys, the West, the East, whatever it is, the West, France and the West was in the Sahel for many years. What did they leave? I mean, the only little clinic in the whole north of Mali, we built it with, $100,000. There was nothing. There's nothing in Tibesti in the north of Chad. There's nothing. They left nothing. I'm sorry, General, there's nothing. Nor the United States, nor, I don't know where this money goes. But the fact is, people did not see any change. So what are we saying now? Oh, you have to prefer us to the Russians or the Iranians or whoever it is. Why should they prefer us? I mean, what did we do? We didn't do anything. We just sat there with our weapons and killed people for all these years. So I'm not saying the security is not important, but you have to have something, and that's what I was saying before. Our values, where are our values? This is all double standards and hypocrisy, and who believes in us anymore? And in order to start a new relationship, you have to start from the bottom up. And the bottom up means that you don't have a summit and you don't invite these people from the Sahel just because the African Union doesn't want to see them. It doesn't make sense. If you want to be in the Sahel, you've got to talk to the people in the Sahel. And that means the people who are running these countries, and that means the people who are on the ground in the different parts of the country. Because if it's like, oh no, we're not talking to them, we're going to talk to them, it just doesn't make sense. So to answer your question, which was a very good question, I believe, which is very concrete, what do? You start humbly, very humbly, and you do bottom-up diplomacy, because I understand that diplomats cannot go and talk to the president of, I'm not going to say a country, but one of those countries now because of sanctions or because whatever the problems are. But you can do it. You can do it in a very subtle way. You can do it in an economic development context, or in a cultural context, or even just helping these people rediscover their roots. Because as I was saying before, the empire of Sundiata Keita, we're talking about Monday Constitution. The Monday Constitution was something extraordinary. Why are these countries now feeling that they have to have a model which is sovereignty and territorial integrity, etc., which is a model that was imported from the colonialists? And why are we not looking at countries in Africa that have experiences in reconciliation, in economic development, and in security? Countries that I'm not going to mention, but that, for example, one of these countries has a 30th anniversary of a genocide that they were able to stop by themselves, because we weren't there, no one was there, everybody left. They had to do it themselves. They did it themselves. They built their country. It's a beautiful country now, and it's economically developed, and it's based on dignity. Dignity. So why not turn to a country such as that, for example, and say, help us to make ourselves understood. Help us to begin humbly. And I think, and I'm going to conclude, I'm sorry, and I don't want to be, I'm a US citizen, I'm an Italian citizen, and this is not just, because of I'm being partisan for Italy, but Italy is a small country, if you think about it. It doesn't have big, army like France, it doesn't have the big economic development like Germany or whatever. It's a small country, and it's in the center of the Mediterranean. It has centuries of history of how to deal with the human dimension. They know, even our police, our carabinieri, they know how to deal in the human dimension. So I think that I've heard many experts and Sahel envoys saying that it's important to have a collective effort. A collective effort. Okay, so let Italy lead this collective effort, not because she wants to be number one, not because she wants France to sit in the background, or Germany to sit in the background, or the US. No, simply because she's there. She's right there in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. She's the closest. She has the possibility to really talk to the people the way the people need to be spoken to, with dignity and respect. So I think we should help Italy.
I have nothing further to say. Let us let it so.
General, then your last words.
Just simplement 4 mots. sur la façon dont je pense que nous devons résoudre les crises. Le premier, c'est la lucidité sur ce que nous sommes, la lucidité sur ce que nous faisons dans la gestion des relations internationales, chaque pays à son niveau. Le deuxième, c'est l'humilité, c'est avant de décider de ce qu'on va faire, c'est comprendre, apprendre et comprendre. Je pense qu'on est dans une époque où on n'apprend plus, on n'a plus le temps d'apprendre et on a rarement le temps de comprendre. Le troisième mot, c'est le pragmatisme, c'est se fixer des objectifs qui soient atteignables dans la résolution des crises. Et puis le dernier mot, c'est la sincérité, c'est rapprocher ce qu'on dit de ce qu'on fait. C'est en tout cas les leçons que j'ai retenues de mon expérience dans les opérations et au niveau politico-militaire. Enfin, je vous remercie d'avoir été un aussi important public pour moi aux États-Unis.
So I think to conclude that the way we should solve the crisis, I will sum them up in 4 words. The first one is lucidity. We need to be aware of what we are, of what we do in international relations. Second one is humility, which means that before making decisions, we need to understand, we need to learn. I know that in those crazy times, you don't have the time to learn, we don't take the time to learn. The third one is pragmatism, which means setting achievable goals in crisis resolution. And the final one is sincerity, that is trying to connect what we say to what we do. And that's all of this is what I've taken from my experience on various theaters of operations in my career in the political and diplomatic area.
Thank you, General. Thank you all. And I just realized that we didn't scratch the surface of so many issues and to develop on several wonderful ideas that really out of the box, at least what I understand from how the things are discussed here. So I think this requires or calls for a follow-up, which we will hopefully facilitate soon. I want to thank you for being with us today. I want to thank all of our audience and yes, Senator Coons' office for gracious us to have this meaningful conversation in the center of our political power in Washington, D.C. God bless you all.